Is hacking or genning in Pokemon really that bad? Alright, hang on, before you go clicking away, just hear me out. Since the very first Pokemon games all the way back in 1996 with Pokemon Red and Blue, hacking or genning Pokemon has always been an available alternative for any players that didn't want to spend a ton of time to trade different Pokemon and train up their perfect Pokemon team. But what began as a neat trick to just cut some corners and get a team really quickly has easily become one of the most controversial issues in all of Pokemon. Some people absolutely love the ability to make Pokemon anytime they want, any way they want. But people with a differing opinion say that everybody who hacks or gens Pokemon is ruining the franchise. They're just a bunch of rule breakers and shouldn't be doing what they're doing, and if they get disqualified from an event, well, so be it. Regardless of what side of the debate you're on, there's no arguing that's a pretty hot-button issue in the Pokemon community. While online debate about the topic rages on pretty much every day on social media, in person, it's kind of like steroid use in baseball back in the 90s. It's pretty safe to assume anybody you play against may have hacked Pokemon, and whatever you do, don't say anything about it and just keep your mouth shut unless you're among friends. And honestly, I think the exact opposite is what we need here. We really haven't had an objective look at the culture of modifying Pokemon, a look at why so many people do it and don't think it's an issue, and where open discourse is encouraged. And with that in mind, that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We are going to take a deep dive into the world of hacking Pokemon and attempt to answer these three questions. What is hacking? Is hacking really that bad? And what can Nintendo, the Pokemon Company, and Game Freak do about it going forward? We have a lot to talk about, so with that in mind, put up your feet, hit that like button, sit back and relax, and let's get started. At its core, Pokemon has always been a game about trading. Ever since the developers saw the inventory trading process in Dragon Quest II, they knew they wanted the exact same thing for Pokemon, even requiring trades to evolve certain species. Because the games must allow trading, the game doesn't get confused when a Pokemon just shows up out of nowhere that wasn't there before. Now, once hackers gain access to a Pokemon game's code, they can literally just make Pokemon appear out of thin air. They can also use the same data manipulation process to change Pokemon that player already has in their game file. You can use this to make stats better, make abilities better, give the player more money to buy in-game items, or change any of the moves that Pokemon has. And for the most part, when we're talking about hacking in competitive Pokemon, this is pretty much what people are talking about. But before we dive too deep into the subject, let's get some of the terminology straight so we know what we're talking about here. Now, online, you'll generally see two terms thrown around quite a lot: hacking and genning. Now, objectively, these are pretty much the same thing, but in Pokemon circles, they do tend to have two different meanings. The term hacking generally applies to making something that's not possible, or changing some fundamental elements of the game's code. If you want to make a Pokemon that has illegally high stats, or illegal moves that it can't normally have, or if you even are able to manipulate the RNG of the game to give you favorable rolls every single time, that's generally what people refer to as hacking. Now, the good thing is that anybody who does edit their game in that way is typically caught very quickly when it comes to competitive. People know how much damage Pokemon should be doing to one another, so if Pokemon are consistently doing more or less damage than that, it's a pretty good indicator that something weird is going on. And that's why the Pokemon community has come up with the term genning. Now, genning does use the exact same save data manipulation as hacking, but the main difference is that when a player is genning Pokemon, everything they're making is possible to exist in the real world. The Pokemon are still going to have their normal stats, everything they could get through a normal playthrough. The only difference is that the Pokemon are coming from a computer and not the Pokemon version of the birds and the bees. But how does one even hack Pokemon? Is it really that easy to just create a Pokemon and just throw it into your game? Well, as it turns out, it really is. The basic idea is that you take an existing save file, copy it, make revisions, and then save over the previous file, introducing all the new changes to the game. Now, in the era of Nintendo Switch, that typically means having a homebrewed Nintendo Switch console so it can run custom firmware, and using a save editing program, something like PK Hex. The entire process of homebrewing your Switch and making custom Pokemon can honestly be done in just a matter of minutes, which makes it incredibly efficient. Now, in the past, items like a Game Shark or an Action Replay could be used to inject Pokemon directly into your game file. However, because the Nintendo Switch saves all your save files on the system itself, you do need an entirely homebrewed system to make your custom Pokemon. And now, this probably makes it sound like it's going to make it harder to get gen Pokemon, but in fact, it did the opposite. Because you need entirely homebrewed systems, people can have bots operating their Nintendo Switch console and then stream the entire process over Twitch. These streamers literally allow players to request Pokemon that they then make on demand and trade them to them for free. It has made getting very specific Pokemon for teams incredibly easy, which is why it's such a prevalent thing in the competitive community. Now, on the surface, this sounds great, right? I mean, easier Pokemon for everybody. But it's not that simple. For every fan of genning, there is somebody that absolutely hates it. Taking into account arguments on both sides of the aisle, let's try and answer the age-old question, is hacking really that bad? The Pokemon Company's official stance is that any Pokemon that has been modified through any external means, or even a Pokemon that comes from parents that were modified by external means, are illegal and not allowed in Pokemon events. And this seems straightforward enough, right? I mean, Pokemon sets the rules and they expect players to follow them. Now all they have to do is enforce it, and that's where the trouble comes in. Now, with all due respect to the Pokemon Company, they are horrible at detecting Gen Pokemon. The technology they have at their disposal to detect whether or not a Pokemon is legitimate or not has historically been laughably bad, with hundreds and hundreds of edited Pokemon being allowed into Pokemon events every year. You see, for the most part, the technology they use just looks at whether or not a Pokemon is possible. As long as there's nothing impossible on the Pokemon and there's no obvious red flags, the Pokemon is given the green light to go ahead. And while we're at it, let's talk about Worlds this year. There were a ton of disqualifications for people that were caught using Gen Pokemon. So how did Pokemon do it if their system is so bad? Well, a lot of people that use Gen Pokemon were using Pokemon from previous games, such as Sword and Shield or Pokemon Legends Arceus. To get those Pokemon into the Scarlet and Violet games, they would need to go through Pokemon Home, and they would be assigned a home tracker number. It's kind of like a social security number, but one that only applies to any Pokemon that's come through Pokemon Home. Players who just gen their Pokemon and threw them right under the Scarlet and Violet games had their Pokemon detected because they were missing that home tracker. Now this caused a big issue because there were a lot of disqualifications from people that didn't realize their Pokemon needed to have that. And it did make a very big splash, but the problem is, it's still the exact same technology. They're just looking for anything that's illegal, and any Pokemon that may have been genned into Pokemon Legends Arceus, put through Home and entered into Scarlet and Violet, still passed no problem. And that's what's led to so many players thinking genning Pokemon is no big deal as long as they don't get caught. And with Pokemon being about as good a detective as Officer Barbrady from South Park,
this is nothing out of the unusual. Cows turn themselves inside out all the time.
that seems pretty unlikely. Now, this is already a pretty tough situation, and again, it's not made any better by all those disqualifications that keep on happening. Players enter into a mindset that they didn't do anything wrong, and then they end up getting disqualified, losing hundreds or thousands of dollars that they spent to go to the event, and probably having their vacation ruined at the same time. And that feeling of just being blindsided disqualified from an event isn't helped by the fact that Pokemon is kind of inconsistent with how they apply their own rules. It seems like if players are caught using Gen Mons, there's a possibility they just won't be able to use those Pokemon for the event, or there's a chance that they may be disqualified entirely. The rules are left intentionally vague in this area to allow the Pokemon professors at the event to come up with the best resolution to the issue, but it ends up with a lot of players not actually knowing what's going to happen if they do get caught. Heck, Pokemon seems to even have some trouble identifying what they consider to be external means. Now, throughout the entire history of Pokemon, there have always been glitches in the games. Back in Red and Blue, we could get Missing No or Mew, or even use the Trainer Fly glitch to get whatever Pokemon you wanted. And going all the way up to the recent games, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, there were several glitches in the game that allowed you to duplicate Pokemon or duplicate items. Now, with all the history Pokemon has had with glitches, using all these exploits to make the games easier for players, you would think that maybe they would just kind of tolerate the Pokemon that were duplicated in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and just take no real actions against the players. Well, you'd be wrong. In one of the updates, they actually patched it so none of the duplication glitches would work anymore. Now, that's not really all that surprising, but what is that any Pokemon that was found to be duplicated was flagged and was not allowed to leave that save file. So you couldn't trade it with anybody else, and you couldn't put it into Pokemon Home. It was just stuck in that save file for pretty much all eternity. So maybe it seems like Pokemon doesn't allow glitch Pokemon into events, right? I guess that makes sense. But then Scarlet and Violet came out. And Scarlet and Violet have raids where you can get a lot of different Pokemon no problem. However, there was another issue. Raids for female Indeedees actually had Indeedee spawning with the wrong moveset. Now, in the game's code, female Indeedee is not able to learn the move Trick Room. Now, Trick Room is a move that female Indeedee players had been wanting for a very long time because it will make the Pokemon absolutely unprecedentedly strong. But previously, Trick Room was only available on the male Indeedee, and now because of a glitch, it was on the female Indeedee as well. Alright, but now going by the precedent that we saw in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, female Indeedee with Trick Room just won't be allowed in events, right? No problem. But, nope. It's fully legal and has been used with a number of Trick Room teams in very high-profile Pokemon events. And this also had the side effect of making male Indeedee almost completely unusable in any competitive event. Alright, so we know that Pokemon struggles a bit coming up with and enforcing its own rules, but why is there so much debate within the Pokemon community about genning? Now, proponents of genning say that there's no advantage whatsoever to genning Pokemon. They're all possible, so the only real difference is the time saved, which they can use to spend with families and friends, go to movies, all that kind of stuff. But the opponents of genning say that they are breaking the rules and gaining a huge unfair advantage. But is this an advantage? Well, simply put, yeah. Players that gen have more time to work on their strategies for different events, and they also have more time to run calculations to figure out which Pokemon are going to do well against others. But more so than that, if players go to large-scale events and need to make last-minute changes to their team, players that gen can make those changes instantaneously, whereas players who don't may need to sacrifice sleep or even meals to get those Pokemon done. And while admittedly this may not be a colossal advantage, it is worth considering. But the other issue is that genning opens the door to the possibility of other, more serious cheating. As I alluded to before, by having a homebrewed system, it is theoretically possible that you can change some of the game's mechanics. You can make it so that your moves do the most amount of damage possible. You can even make it so most of your opponent's moves are going to miss. You can even create Pokemon again with illegal stats that can do so much more damage than the Pokemon normally could do in the game. Now, while all this does sound far-fetched, every single one of these examples has happened at least once in the past. But again, the saving grace here is that the effects of these are usually so catastrophically huge that most people are going to pick up on them right away and call over a professor to kind of check things out. So even though this sounds pretty bad, it usually gets detected very early before it can make a big impact on an event. So with time being the only real advantage, does that make genning unfair? Well, it ends up being a situation where it kind of depends on your stance on the issue. And again, that's pretty much what's caused the great divide in the Pokemon community. In fact, it seems like the only thing the two sides of the community can agree on is that they don't agree on genning. So what could Game Freak, Nintendo, or the Pokemon Company do to resolve this issue? Now, the most obvious solution that always gets suggested is that Nintendo just needs to make a system that can't be homebrewed, and fair enough. But it's tougher than it sounds. Almost every video game system these days has some kind of security in place to try and stop homebrewing from happening, but as of the date of recording, every single Nintendo and PlayStation system has been homebrewed in some way. Simply put, it's really hard to anticipate every single method all of the collective minds of the internet are going to use to access your system. Now, the only brand that has been fairly resistant to homebrewing is the Xbox, and homebrews even exist for those. And, you know, they also have the collective minds of Microsoft at their disposal, which certainly helps. And even if their system was ironclad, the second you open up Pokemon Home to some of the older Pokemon, you're going to have a flood of those Gen Pokemon coming in. So even though this proposal is the most obvious, it really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, the next answer that people try to suggest is that Pokemon needs to beef up its detection software and make it so it can detect every single Gen Pokemon no matter what. Now, this is also a very good theory, but the problem is, very good Gen Pokemon that are indistinguishable from their real counterparts are, well, indistinguishable. At the end of the day, even real Pokemon are just bits of data. So if your custom data is made to be identical to the data on the games, yeah, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. Plus, like, as we've discussed already, Pokemon is kind of not great about adhering to their own policies, so I really don't think this method can work either. Well then, what if we just allow genning fully? We give everybody a big thumbs up across the board and allow them to do just whatever they want. Well, I hate to burst that bubble and upset some of the very vocal members of the VGC community, but that's probably the least likely out of the three. The Pokemon Company and Nintendo will never admit that they have just given up on an issue, and again, it will open the door to more rampant cheating, kind of like what we discussed before. Alright, and let's just think about the logistics of this argument for 1 second. That would mean that going forward, Nintendo needs to make every single one of their consoles deliberately able to be homebrewed. That would lead to a massive increase in piracy of Nintendo games, and we all know how they feel about that, so I don't think this is ever going to happen anytime soon. It is very fun to think about an alternative reality where that's possible, though. Alright, so then what can be done to stop genning entirely? Well, here's my solution to the problem, and Pokemon, if you want to use this, that's perfectly fine with me, but I wouldn't mind a little donation to keep the good ideas coming. Anyway, let's take a trip together to a theoretical Pokemon region. In this region, once you beat the main story, you get to attend the prestigious Battle Research Academy. It's a school focused on figuring out how to make Pokemon as strong as possible in battle. They say that by training only specific stats or giving your Pokemon a specific nature, you can unlock the hidden potential of any Pokemon. But this process can take a very long time to master, and because we're dealing with Pokemon at the peak of their abilities, your Pokemon could be hurt in the process. To prevent that, they've developed hard light holograms. These holograms act in battle just like real Pokemon, and can even battle with real Pokemon. Think like in the Hunger Games Part 2. The only downside is that these holograms look like holograms. They're not real Pokemon. But as far as battling is concerned, they're close enough. When you're ready to battle, all you have to do is walk into a battle room, and you can edit any of these holograms however you want. You can freely change their stats, abilities, moves, anything you want. And when you're ready, the battlefield will appear around you. And hopefully with your battles, you can unlock the true hidden potential of every Pokemon, leading to the discovery of the strongest Pokemon ever. In my opinion, the only way to ever remove genning fully from Pokemon is to take away all of the value that genning offers. These days, breeding Pokemon is easier than ever before, and it still takes a while. Making Pokemon easier to breed is never going to be the answer. Until you can literally just snap your fingers and make a Pokemon appear, genning is going to be a thing. So why does the school concept fix that? Well, in this academy, you can battle with a hologram of any Pokemon. You literally have the ability to freely edit all the Pokemon, their stats, everything you could ever want to affect your battles. However, the cost of doing this is that the Pokemon don't look very cool, they just look like transparent holograms. These holograms will all be able to battle in place of real Pokemon. So all you have to do is run the link battles and the live competitions through this academy, and boom, genning is gone. You now have a way for people to instantaneously make Pokemon to battle with on demand, and it's even tied into the story. People would be able to use these hologram Pokemon in events with no penalty because they are designed to do that with the game. And since it's so fast and easy, there's no incentive to hacking. But check it out, it gets even better. In the Academy, once you pass through whatever sort of challenges they have, you're allowed to use your own Pokemon. They feel like you finally got to that level where you can risk your own Pokemon against the holograms. So the people that want to actually shiny hunt and use their own Pokemon in the battles, they are still allowed to do that. And casual fans who just love collecting Pokemon and trying them out online, they can use their own Pokemon too. So if people just want to plug and play, grab some Pokemon and start battling seriously online, you can grab the holograms or you can use the Pokemon that you've been carrying with you this whole time. The idea is that this system removes the value from genning Pokemon, but it doesn't remove the value from the Pokemon themselves, and people are still going to want to shiny hunt and do all that good stuff. And on top of all of that, players who just want to go ahead, grab their games and play through them all the way, and then put them down until the next generations come out, they will be rewarded with a fun, expansive, and exciting post-game that will add a lot of extra content to the games, making them worth their price. It's a situation where literally everybody wins. And yeah, I know some of the naysayers are going to say, but isn't that letting the hackers win? Well, yeah, kind of. But you gotta understand, that's kind of a thing that happens in real life all the time. Do you remember when CDs used to be so expensive you could only buy one a week without breaking your bank? And then all of a sudden one day they just suddenly weren't? A major factor in that was the spike in piracy of online music that happened in the 2000s. The music industry hated the idea of that happening, but they really had no way of stopping it. So they just gave in and lowered their prices. Another example is cell phones being used in planes. For a very long time, your phone had to be off if the plane was taking off or landing. But the thing is, nobody followed the rule. They would turn their phone off and then turn it right back on as soon as the stewardess walked away. So all the airlines just gave up, and now you can use your phone as long as it's in airplane mode. The bottom line is, this isn't a competition. We're not here to fight each other, we're here to resolve this issue. So let's set aside the idea of there being a winner and a loser, and just look at what's best for Pokemon. I see a solution where genning isn't a debate anymore, pretty much everybody gets what they want, and the new games have a ton of value in their post-game. And honestly, I think that's what the Pokemon community needs more than anything else. But there you go, that has been my deep dive into the world of genning Pokemon, and my solution for how to make the genning debate not be a thing at all. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this. Do you think genning is an issue? Do you think it's not an issue? And what do you think about my proposed solution? I want to hear from you, and the main point of this video is general discourse. I want people to be able to talk to one another, and that's what I encourage you to do down in the comments. That being said, everybody, I truly hope you enjoyed the video. I put a lot of work into it to try and bring you guys the most comprehensive video I can. So if you guys did enjoy it and did get some value and entertainment out of it, please make sure that you hit that like button in the face, and of course consider subscribing to the channel, because it really does help us out and will help us as we are still growing as a channel. But that being said, everybody, I've been Blaine for Bridge4 Games. Thank you so much for stopping by and hanging out with me. Make sure that you guys have a happy, epic, awesome, and amazing day. Please be good to each other. We are all part of the amazing Pokemon world, and it's a world that's pretty much big enough for everybody. So until next time, I'll see you in the next video. See you around. Bye-bye.